Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Today, we're diving into something I know a lot of you have been asking about, conflict management systems.
Oh, interesting.
Specifically, we're cracking open designing conflict management systems. It's by Kathy Costantino and Christina Sickles-Merchant.
Okay, yeah.
And, we've talked a lot on the show about moving away from that like fight or flight response to conflict.
Right.
And looking for ways that organizations can move towards a more collaborative approach. And this book really gets into that. So
Yeah, and I think what's really fascinating is that a lot of organizations, when they're faced with conflict, they kind of fall back on those familiar responses. It's almost like they're hardwired for denial or avoidance or just trying to power through it.
Yeah. It's like it's like sticking your fingers in your ears and yelling la la la, hoping it'll go away.
Right, exactly.
But the book talks about this company, Montreux, that really illustrates these knee-jerk reactions.
Yeah.
They had this customer who had a huge issue with their software.
Oh, wow.
But the CEO just wanted to sweep it under the rug.
Oh, no.
Which, spoiler alert, never really works.
Right. It never works. And I mean, what's the fallout from that? You end up with all these hidden costs.
Exactly.
The inefficiency, the low morale, people not wanting to speak up because they're afraid.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do you ever see this sort of thing happening, in the organizations you work with?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Way more than anyone would want to admit, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But the good news is there's a better way.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
And that's where this book gets really interesting.
Okay.
It talks about this concept of alternative dispute resolution.
Oh, yeah, ADR.
Exactly, ADR.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
So it's basically, it's like having a whole toolkit for handling disagreements.
So it's not about, always picking peace over fighting or anything like that. It's about having the right approach for the situation.
Exactly. Yeah. It's about choosing the right tool for the job.
Yeah.
So, we're talking about things like negotiation, mediation, even arbitration.
Mm-hmm.
It's about picking the right tool.
And that's where dispute systems design comes in, right? Or
Yeah.
DSD. It's like building a custom toolkit, right?
Right.
You wouldn't use a hammer to fix a leaky faucet.
Right.
So DSD helps you choose the right tool for each conflict and then build a system around using those tools the right way.
So ADR gives us the tools, and then DSD shows us how to bake those into the foundation of an organization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
And what's really cool is the book uses this framework
Oh, yeah.
to show how the thinking around conflict has changed over time.
Okay.
They call it the 4 quadrants of conflict management evolution.
The 4 quadrants. I like it.
Okay. So these quadrants represent how things have gone from systems that are, based on power to those that are more about everyone's interests.
So like a journey from gladiatorial combat to a peace conference or something.
Yeah, exactly. And they start with those historical examples like labor strikes.
Oh, right.
Those would fall squarely in that first quadrant,
Okay.
It's very much a power struggle.
Yeah, I see that.
Then you move into that second quadrant,
Okay.
where we see things like workers' rights and legal frameworks coming in.
Oh, so like the Wagner Act of 1935?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example. It gave workers the right to form unions.
Yeah.
It's still about power, but there's a system in place now.
Yeah. So it's becoming more structured, I guess.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And then we hit quadrant 3 and things start to get even more interesting.
Okay.
This is where you see a shift towards collaboration.
So you start seeing things like mandated mediation in court cases.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's about finding common ground, but it's still being dictated from the top down.
Okay.
And finally, we arrive at quadrant 4.
Quadrant 4, the Holy Grail.
The Holy Grail.
Yep.
This is all about joint problem solving, giving everyone a voice.
So what kind of examples do they give for that?
Well, they talk about things like community search conferences.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, where people come together to really hash things out and find solutions that work for everyone.
So you've probably noticed how most conflict resolution is really about putting out the fire, right?
Right.
But quadrant 4, it's about preventing the fire in the first place.
Exactly.
Wow. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, imagine a workplace where, people feel empowered to address those issues before they escalate into huge blowups.
Right.
That's the promise of quadrant 4.
And that's what makes it so compelling, right? It's not just about resolving the dispute that's right in front of you. It's about like shifting the entire approach to conflict.
Exactly.
But okay, so that sounds great in theory.
Yeah.
But how do we actually get there? Like what are the core principles of this more collaborative approach?
Well, the book, it really emphasizes these 3 core values
Okay.
that need to be part of the whole process: participation, openness, and feedback.
I really like what they say about stakeholder involvement.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about, getting everyone in a room and hoping for the best. It's about truly understanding
Yeah.
their concerns
Right.
and making sure the system actually works for them.
Yeah, if people feel like they're being heard and that the process is fair, they're much more likely to actually use it.
It all goes back to that trust, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
But okay, so let's be real.
Sure.
Changing an organization's culture it's not exactly a walk in the park.
No, it's not.
I'm sure there's a lot of resistance to that.
Oh, absolutely. The book actually acknowledges that resistance is pretty much inevitable.
Right.
What I find interesting is how they break down the sources of that resistance.
Okay.
So there's fear,
Right.
lack of trust, and then these incongruent symbols and images we see in a lot of organizations.
Okay, I'm picturing those corporate posters with like eagles soaring and hands shaking.
Right.
But everyone's like secretly terrified of their boss.
Exactly.
Like the messaging just doesn't match reality at all.
Yeah, it really highlights how important it is to address those deeper concerns head on.
So how do we do that? How do we address those concerns?
Well, they use this analogy that I really love.
Okay.
It's called having tea with your demons.
Having tea with your demons, all right? I'm intrigued.
So it's based on this Zen parable
Okay.
about this seeker of knowledge who encounters these demons on his journey, right?
Okay.
And instead of running away, he invites them in for tea. Yeah, so it's about facing your fears directly.
Okay.
Acknowledging them instead of trying to pretend they're not there.
Okay, so how does that apply to like organizational change?
So let's say you have a team that's really resistant to using mediation.
Okay.
Because they see it as a sign of weakness or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So instead of trying to force them into mediation, a leader who's having tea with the demons, they would acknowledge those fears.
Oh, okay.
And actually have a conversation about why they exist.
Yeah.
And how to address them.
That makes sense.
Right. It's about acknowledging that those feelings are valid, even if they don't, logically make sense on the surface.
Right. Right.
And the book, it suggests different strategies for addressing those different types of resistance,
Okay, so like what would we do for fear, for example?
So for fear, it's about providing clear information, thorough training, even pilot programs to show that this new approach can actually work.
Right. So it's about proving that this isn't just some fluffy idea.
Exactly.
That it can work in the real world.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then for lack of trust, it's about involving people in the process right from the start.
Oh, okay.
Making sure everything is transparent and that people are being held accountable.
So it's about showing people that this isn't just something that's being imposed from above.
Right.
It's something that they're actually part of.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And for those incongruent symbols, it's all about aligning the messaging with the actual values.
Yeah, yeah.
Walk the walk, don't just talk the talk.
It's about creating that culture where actions actually speak louder than words.
Absolutely.
So, okay, we've designed this fantastic system.
Right.
We've addressed the resistance. Now what?
Well, now we need to make sure everyone knows how to use it.
Oh, right.
That's where training and education come in.
Training, of course,
Yeah.
of course.
And they dedicate a whole chapter to this.
Oh, wow.
Because it's not just about training internal stakeholders, it's about making sure everyone understands how this new system works.
So we're talking about like suppliers, customers, anyone who might be involved in a conflict with the organization.
Absolutely. It only makes sense because if only one side understands the process, it creates this imbalance.
Yeah, it's like trying to play a game where only one team knows the rules.
Exactly.
It's not going to be fair. It's not going to be productive.
Right, right.
So so how do we bring those external stakeholders up to speed?
They have some great advice like developing clear communication materials,
Yeah, okay.
explaining the system, giving them access to the same training resources that you give internal folks,
Right.
and even offering incentives for participation.
Incentives. Okay, I'm interested.
Yeah, it's about making sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah.
And that they have the opportunity to get on board.
Okay.
So it creates a more level playing field.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But what about incentives within the organization? Like, are we talking bonuses, promotions for resolving conflicts quickly?
Not necessarily. The book, it recognizes that people are motivated by a lot of different things.
Okay.
Not just money.
So what are some examples of those non-monetary incentives?
Well, for internal stakeholders, it could be things like recognition for their contributions.
Okay.
Or opportunities for professional development,
Yeah.
Even just feeling like they have a voice in the process.
Right. It's about creating that culture where people feel valued.
Exactly.
And that their input actually matters.
Exactly. And then for external stakeholders, the incentives might look different,
Yeah.
It could be things like faster dispute resolution, reduced costs, or even just a stronger relationship with the organization.
So it's about finding those win-win scenarios.
Exactly.
Where both sides actually benefit from using ADR.
Right. And they encourage organizations to be creative,
Okay.
It's about understanding what truly motivates people and tailoring the rewards accordingly.
That's really smart.
Yeah.
It's not about just slapping on a generic incentive program. It's about understanding what actually drives people.
Exactly.
And using that to encourage participation.
Right.
That's a much more effective approach.
Yeah, it is. And it ties into this idea of taking a holistic approach to conflict management, It's not just about resolving individual disputes. It's about creating this culture where conflict is actually an opportunity for growth.
That's a powerful concept.
Yeah, it is.
It's so different from the way we traditionally think about conflict.
Right. Yeah.
All that negativity and damage control.
Mm-hmm.
It's refreshing to think about it as something that can actually strengthen an organization.
Absolutely.
And its relationships.
It's about shifting from this mindset of fear to a mindset of opportunity.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the design, we've talked about the principles of these systems.
Right.
But how do we put them into practice?
Well, that's where the book really gets into the nitty-gritty details.
Okay.
Because implementing a new system is rarely easy.
Right.
There are almost always bumps along the way.
Let's talk about those bumps.
Okay.
What are some of the challenges that organizations face when they're trying to implement these new systems?
Well, one of the biggest hurdles is overcoming resistance.
Okay.
They actually dedicate a whole chapter to this.
Oh, wow.
And it's packed with insights about why people push back on change.
So we're talking about more than just a few like grumpy employees who don't like anything new?
It can be much deeper than that.
Okay.
They identify these three main sources of resistance.
Okay.
Fear, lack of trust, and those incongruent symbols and images we were talking about earlier.
Okay, let's unpack those a little bit.
Sure.
What are people typically afraid of when it comes to these kinds of changes?
Well, change is scary for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to something like conflict.
Right.
People might worry about losing control or being seen as weak.
Oh.
Or even facing retaliation for speaking up.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
Right.
Yeah.
And then where does the lack of trust come in?
Right.
Well, often rooted in past experiences.
Okay.
If people have been burned before, if they've seen conflict handled poorly,
right,
they're going to be skeptical of anything new, no matter how well-intentioned it is.
It's like that saying, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me.
Exactly.
Yeah. People
are hesitant to buy into something new if they've been disappointed in the past.
Right.
And then there's those incongruent symbols and images,
Right.
If an organization talks about collaboration, but their actions send a different message.
It creates a disconnect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it breeds distrust.
Yeah, it's like saying one thing and doing another.
Right.
It's a surefire way to undermine any kind of change initiative.
It is.
So how do we address these sources of resistance?
Well, the book is very clear on this, Addressing these concerns requires more than just lip service.
Right.
It requires a genuine commitment from leadership.
Okay.
Consistent, open communication.
Yeah.
And tangible steps to actually address those fears and build trust.
So it's not about like silencing the critics. It's about bringing them into the conversation.
Exactly.
And working together to find solutions.
Exactly. And they introduce this really interesting concept called having tea with your demons.
Okay, we talked about that earlier.
Yeah, right.
But I'm still not quite sure how that applies to this situation.
So imagine a team that's resistant to using mediation.
Okay.
Because they see it as a sign of weakness.
Mm.
So instead of trying to force them into mediation, a leader who's having tea with the demons would acknowledge those fears.
Okay.
You know, they'd facilitate a discussion about why those fears exist,
Right.
and explore ways to address them.
So it's about validating people's concerns even if you don't agree with them.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they suggest different strategies for addressing different types of resistance, right?
Right.
So for fear, like we said, it's about providing clear information,
Right.
thorough training, pilot programs
Mm-hmm.
to show that the new approach can work.
Right, to give people that sense of confidence
Yeah.
that this is something that will actually work for them.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then for lack of trust, it's about involving stakeholders right from the beginning,
Okay.
ensuring transparency
Yeah.
and holding people accountable.
Makes sense.
Right.
If people feel like they're part of the solution,
Yeah.
they're more likely to trust the process. Okay, and for those incongruent symbols, it's about walking the walk.
Exactly.
Right, aligning those actions with the values.
Yeah. Walk the walk. Don't just talk the talk.
Actions speak louder than words.
They do. They do.
Okay, so even with the best intentions,
Right.
there can be roadblocks.
Oh, yeah.
What are some of the structural constraints that organizations need to consider?
Well, one of the most common ones is a lack of access.
Okay.
The system might be great in theory, but if people don't know how to use it,
Right.
or if it's too difficult,
Yeah.
it's not going to work.
It's like having a state-of-the-art gym, but making it like almost impossible to get a membership.
Exactly. What's the point?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And another constraint is a lack of resources,
Okay.
both funding and personnel.
Right.
Organizations might love the idea of ADR,
Yeah.
but if they're not willing to invest the time,
Right.
the money, the staff,
It's not going to work.
it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, you can't build a house with just a hammer and nails,
Yes,
right?
exactly. You need more than that.
And I imagine leadership plays a huge role in this too, right?
Absolutely.
If the people at the top aren't
Yeah.
fully on board, it's gonna be tough.
It is. If they're not committed, if they're not modeling the behavior,
Right.
the whole thing can fall apart.
Yeah, it's like trying to steer a ship when the captain's constantly changing course.
Exactly. No one knows where they're going.
Yeah, exactly. No one knows what's going on.
Right.
So addressing these constraints, it's multifaceted.
Yeah, it's about ensuring accessibility, securing resources, and having strong leadership
Right.
that's really invested.
It's about creating that fertile ground where this new approach can actually take root.
Exactly. And this is where they introduce this concept of orchestration.
Orchestration. Okay, tell me more.
So they use this analogy of a symphony conductor
Right.
who has to harmonize all the different instruments to make this beautiful music.
Right.
So in conflict management, orchestration is about bringing together all the elements,
Okay.
the people, the resources, the processes, the leadership,
Yeah.
and making sure they're all working together.
So it's not just about having all the pieces, it's about making sure they fit together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it takes careful planning, coordination, and constant monitoring.
Right. To make sure that everything's working smoothly.
Exactly.
But even with the most carefully crafted plans, there's always going to be bumps.
Oh, of course. Of course. Implementation is not a one-time thing. It's a process.
Right.
You have to get feedback, see what's working, what's not, and make adjustments.
It's about being willing to learn and adapt as you go.
Exactly. There's no such thing as perfect.
Right.
Especially when it comes to something as complex as organizational change.
And they provide some helpful tips for conducting those evaluations, right?
They do. They do.
Like what?
So establishing clear goals from the get-go,
Okay.
collecting data throughout the process, and involving stakeholders in every step.
So it's not just about gathering data just for the sake of having data.
Right.
It's about actually using that information to make the system better
Exactly.
and to make sure you're moving in the right direction.
Right. And that ongoing evaluation, it's not just for the success of the system itself.
Okay.
It's also for maintaining buy-in.
Oh, right.
When people see that their feedback is being taken seriously
Yeah.
and that things are improving.
They're going to be more engaged.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it shows that it's not just a static thing.
Right.
It's a dynamic process.
And it's collaborative.
Exactly.
Right. And that brings us back to one of the book's core themes, right?
It does.
The importance of culture change.
Yeah.
Implementing a new system is not just about those new processes. It's about shifting the entire way that the organization thinks about conflict.
Exactly. It's about moving away from that adversarial mindset.
Right.
And towards a more collaborative approach.
It's a big shift.
It is.
How do we even begin to facilitate that kind of transformation?
Well, it's not something that can be imposed,
Right.
or achieved overnight.
Yeah.
It requires buy-in from everyone.
So it's about creating this shared understanding of the benefits of this new approach.
Exactly.
And empowering everyone to contribute.
Right. And they talk about this idea of creating a culture of choice.
Culture of choice. Okay. I like that.
Yeah.
What does that mean exactly?
So it's about recognizing that there's no one right way to handle every conflict. Different situations call for different approaches.
Right.
And it's about giving people the tools and the autonomy to choose the best method.
Okay. So it's about empowering people to own their conflicts and to feel confident in their ability to navigate them.
Exactly.
It takes the pressure off of finding the perfect solution.
Right.
And acknowledges that there are many paths to resolution.
Absolutely. And this culture of choice, it ties back to that idea of embracing conflict as an opportunity.
Right. So it's not something to be feared or avoided.
Right.
It's something to be harnessed and leveraged.
Exactly.
What a powerful concept.
It is.
It really is.
And they emphasize that the shift in mindset, it's not just for organizations.
Okay.
It's for individuals, too.
Oh, interesting.
It's about bringing this approach into our everyday lives.
So it's about taking these tools and applying them to all our relationships.
Exactly. And our communities.
Yeah, and they offer some really inspiring examples of how people are already doing this.
Oh, that's encouraging.
Yeah.
It gives me hope that we can move towards a future where conflict is seen as an opportunity for positive change. Absolutely, and I think that's a great place to wrap up this part of our discussion.
Yeah, I think so too. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the theoretical foundations to the practical realities of implementing these systems.
We've talked about stakeholders, training, incentives,
yeah,
and even the role of personality.
It's a lot to take in.
It is.
But I think the book really does leave us with a sense of hope.
It does. It does. It shows us that a different way of approaching conflict is not only possible, but it's already happening.
And that's really exciting.
It is.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to turn it back to you, our listener.
And another important thing about training is that it really shouldn't be one size fits all.
Right. Yeah, because I feel like a lot of times organizations will just roll out these like generic programs.
Exactly.
Without really considering the specific needs of their people.
Right. They don't think about who they're actually training and what their needs are.
It's like buying a suit off the rack instead of getting one tailored.
That's a great analogy.
Right. It might fit, but it's not going to look good.
Right. And it's probably not going to do the job as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the book really, really emphasizes that customization piece, making sure that the training is actually relevant to the organization, to its culture, to the types of conflicts they typically face.
So training for managers who deal with interpersonal conflicts every day is going to be different from training for executives who are negotiating big deals.
Exactly. Okay. Different strokes for different folks.
Yeah.
And they also talk about the importance of practice.
Oh, right.
Not just theory, but actually giving people the opportunity to apply those skills.
Right.
So that means simulations, role playing, working through case studies based on real stuff.
Right.
Because you can know the concept of active listening, but actually doing it.
Yeah, it's different when you're in the moment.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where those practical exercises are so important.
Totally.
And all this talk about training makes me think about something else you were curious about, which was how to apply these principles to individuals.
Oh, right.
Because the book is very much focused on organizations.
Yeah.
But, what about us? How do we get better at handling conflict in our everyday lives?
Yeah, what about us regular folks?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And they do touch on this a bit when they talk about the Myers-Briggs.
Oh, the personality test?
Yeah. So the Myers-Briggs, or MBTI,
Mm-hmm.
it can help you understand your personal approach to conflict.
So are they saying that some personalities are just better at handling conflict than others?
Well, it's not about being better or worse. It's just that different personality types tend to have different preferences when it comes to conflict.
Okay.
So some people, they're naturally more comfortable with confrontation,
Oh, okay.
while others prefer a more harmonious approach.
So knowing your MBTI, it's almost like having a user manual for your own brain.
Exactly.
Okay.
It can help you figure out your strengths,
Heck yeah.
your weaknesses
Yeah.
when it comes to disagreement.
So like for example.
So someone with a thinking preference, they might focus on logic and objectivity in a conflict,
Mm-hmm.
while someone with a feeling preference might prioritize the relationship.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it's about understanding those tendencies.
Right.
So you can choose the right approach.
It's like having a little more self-awareness can help you pick the right tool from that ADR toolbox.
Exactly.
Exactly.
That's cool. But it's important to remember conflict management, it's not just about those big blow-ups,
Right.
It's also about those everyday disagreements that pop up.
Oh, yeah, the little things.
Yeah, at work, at home, those can be just as important.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how do we apply these principles to those smaller conflicts?
Yeah, what are some tips from the book that we can use on a day-to-day basis?
Well, they talk a lot about fostering a culture of open communication.
Okay.
And that starts with making sure people feel safe speaking up.
Right. You can't have a productive conversation if everyone's walking on eggshells.
Exactly. And it's not just about speaking up, it's also about listening.
Oh, yeah. Active listening.
Yes.
Right.
Really trying to understand the other person's perspective, even if you don't agree.
Yeah. It's so easy to get caught up in your own head.
Right.
Like already thinking about your response before the other person's even finished talking.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
And that's where those communication skills they talk about in the training chapter come in.
Okay.
Things like using I statements,
Right.
focusing on specific behaviors.
Instead of making generalizations.
Right. And avoiding those accusatory you statements.
Oh, man. I'm definitely guilty of that one.
We all are.
Yeah.
But the key is that, good conflict management, it starts with self-awareness and a willingness to communicate openly.
It's not about avoiding conflict altogether.
Right.
It's about approaching it with the right mindset.
Exactly.
And the right tool.
And sometimes the best tool is just a little bit of empathy.
Yeah. I love that.
Now, while they talk about training and education a lot, they also point out some common pitfalls.
Okay, what are some of the things we should be watching out for?
Well, one mistake is treating ADR training as a one-size-fits-all solution.
Oh, right.
They roll out these generic programs without thinking about who they're training.
Yeah.
And that it doesn't work.
We talked about that a bit earlier in terms of tailoring it to different roles. But I imagine it also applies to like the type of organization as well, right?
Yeah.
A small nonprofit is going to have totally different needs than a multinational corporation.
So it's really about understanding the context.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And they also talk about the importance of going beyond just theory.
Right.
Giving people a chance to practice.
Yeah.
So those simulations, those role-playing exercises, those are really key.
Because it's one thing to understand active listening.
Right.
It's another thing to actually do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's another pitfall they mention, which is focusing too much on internal stakeholders.
Oh, right.
And forgetting about the external ones.
We touched on that a little bit before.
Right. But it's important to bring those external stakeholders into the loop too.
Makes sense, because if only one side understands the process, it's not going to work very well.
Exactly. It's like trying to have a conversation where only one person speaks the language.
Right. It's not really a conversation then.
No, it's not. So how do we make sure those external stakeholders are included?
Well, they talk about things like clear communication.
Okay.
Making sure they have access to the same training resources.
Right.
And even offering those incentives we talked about.
Right.
It's about making sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And speaking of incentives, that's something else we should talk about.
Oh, yeah, the rewards.
Right, the reward.
How do we actually motivate people to to embrace this new system?
Well, the book makes a really important point about broadening our understanding of what motivates people.
Okay.
It's not always about money.
Right, right. There's got to be more to it than that.
There is.
There-
So what are some examples of those non-monetary incentives?
Yeah, give me some ideas.
Well, for internal stakeholders,
Yeah.
it could be things like recognition
Okay.
for their contribution
Right.
or opportunities for professional development,
Mm-hmm.
even just having a voice.
In the process.
It's about making people feel like they're part of something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for external stakeholders, it might look different.
Like
It could be things like a faster process for resolving disputes,
Okay.
reduced costs, or even just a stronger relationship with the organization.
So it's about finding those win-win situations
Exactly.
where both sides see the benefit.
Right. And the book encourages organizations to get creative
Okay.
with those incentives, It's about understanding what really motivates people
Right, right.
and tailoring the rewards accordingly.
So it's not about like a one-size-fits-all approach.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
It's about really thinking about what's going to work.
Right. That's a really smart approach.
It is. And it all comes back to that holistic view of conflict management. It's not just about individual disputes. It's about the bigger picture.
Right. It's about the culture.
Exactly.
It's about creating an environment where conflict is seen as an opportunity.
I love that idea.
Yeah.
It's so different from how we traditionally think about conflict.
It is. It's a big shift.
Yeah, it's a total mindset shift.
It is. And it's a shift from fear to opportunity.
Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the design.
Right.
We've talked about the principles. But how do we actually make it happen?
Well, the book acknowledges that the implementation is rarely smooth sailing.
Right, right.
There are almost always bumps in the road.
Okay, let's talk about those bumps.
Sure.
What are some of the challenges that organizations face when they try to implement these new systems?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is just getting everyone on board.
Oh,
People are creatures of habit.
Right, right.
And changing those habits, it's hard.
Especially when it comes to something as ingrained as conflict.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's not just about putting new rules in place, right? It's about changing hearts and minds.
Yeah, that's a much bigger undertaking.
It is. And that requires patience, persistence,
Yeah.
and clear communication from leadership.
Right. People need to understand why these changes are happening.
Exactly. They need to see the value
Yeah.
and know what their role is in making it work.
So it's about creating that sense of ownership.
Exactly.
Rather than just like forcing it on people.
Right. And it's also important to acknowledge that not everyone will embrace change at the same pace.
Oh, right, right.
Some people will be excited
Mm-hmm.
and others will be hesitant.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Change can be scary.
Yeah, especially when it comes to something as potentially, volatile as conflict.
Right.
Yeah.
People might be afraid of saying the wrong thing.
Right, or doing the wrong thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those fears they're valid.
Right.
We need to acknowledge them
Yeah.
and create a safe space for people to talk about them. Remember that having tea with your demons idea.
Yeah.
That's really relevant here.
So it's not about silencing those voices of dissent or concern?
No, it's about bringing them into the conversation.
Right. Okay.
And the book gives us some tips for addressing those different types of resistance,
Okay, so like what would we do if someone's afraid?
So if someone's afraid, it's about giving them information, training,
Yeah.
maybe even doing a pilot program to show them that it can work.
Right, so they can see it in action.
Exactly. And if it's a lack of trust, it's about involving them from the beginning.
Okay.
Being transparent, holding people accountable.
Makes sense.
Right. So they can see that it's a genuine effort.
Right.
And it's not just something being imposed on them.
Yeah, they have a say in it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then for those incongruent symbols, it's about aligning actions with values.
Right. Walk the walk.
Walk the walk.
Talk the talk.
Don't just talk the talk.
Actions speak louder than words.
They do.
Okay, so we've talked about resistance from individuals.
Right.
But there are also those structural constraints that organizations need to think about.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, what are some examples of those?
Well, one common one is a lack of access.
Okay.
The system might be great, but if people can't use it,
Yeah.
it's not going to do any good.
Right. It's like having all the ingredients for a gourmet meal, but no kitchen.
Exactly. You can't cook if you don't have a kitchen.
Exactly, yeah.
And another constraint is a lack of resources,
Okay.
both funding and personnel.
Right, right.
Organizations might love the idea of ADR,
Yeah.
but they have to be willing to invest in it.
Yeah. Got to put your money where your mouth is.
You do. And
Yeah.
then there's leadership.
Oh, yeah. Leadership's huge.
It's huge.
Right.
If the leaders aren't on board, it's not going to work.
They have to set the tone, right?
They do. They have to model the behavior.
Yeah.
If they're not doing it, no one else will.
Right. It's like trying to lead an orchestra without a conductor.
Exactly. Everyone's just playing their own thing.
Yeah. Chaos.
Chaos.
So addressing these constraints, it really requires a multi-pronged approach.
It does. It
Yeah.
does. It's about making sure the system is accessible,
Okay.
that there are enough resources, and that the leadership is fully committed.
And that's a lot to juggle.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
And that brings us to this really interesting concept that they talk about, which is orchestration.
Orchestration. Okay. I like it. Tell me more.
So they use the analogy of a symphony conductor,
Okay.
right, who has to bring all the different instruments together to make this beautiful music.
Right.
And in conflict management, orchestration is about bringing together all those different elements.
Okay.
The people, the resources, the processes,
Yeah.
the leadership,
Right.
and making sure they're all working in harmony.
So it's not just about having all the pieces. It's about making sure they fit together.
Exactly. Exactly.
How
And
do
that
you-
takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
Planning, coordination, monitoring.
Make sure everything's running smoothly.
Right. You have to be on top of it.
But okay, so even with the best laid plans,
Yeah.
there are going to be bumps along the way, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
You can't plan for everything.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
Implementation is not a one-time thing.
Right.
It's a process.
Right. It's ongoing.
It's ongoing. You have to get feedback, see what's working, what's not,
right. Right.
and make adjustments.
It's about being willing to learn as you go.
Exactly. It's an iterative process.
Yeah.
You have to be flexible.
Yeah.
And they give some good advice about how to do those evaluations,
Okay. Like what?
Well, setting clear goals right from the start,
Okay.
collecting data along the way,
Mm-hmm.
and involving stakeholders in the evaluation.
So it's about using that data to make the system better,
Exactly. Exactly.
not just collecting it for the sake of collecting it.
Right.
And that constant evaluation,
Yeah.
that's not just important for the system itself,
Right.
but it also helps to keep people engaged. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When people see that their feedback is being taken seriously,
Mm-hmm.
that things are actually improving.
They're going to be more likely to stick with it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay. So it shows that it's a dynamic process,
It is.
not just a static one.
Right. It's evolving.
Yeah. And it's collaborative.
It is. It is.
Right.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to one of the book's core themes, right?
It does. It does.
Which is the importance of culture change.
Culture change.
Implementing a new system is about more than just new processes.
Right.
It's about shifting the entire way the organization thinks about conflict.
Exactly. It's about moving away from that adversarial mindset
Right. Right.
and towards a more collaborative approach.
It's a big shift.
It is. It is.
How do we facilitate that kind of transformation?
Well, it's not something that can be forced,
Right.
or done overnight.
Yeah, it's a process.
It's a process. It takes time and it
Mhm.
requires buy-in from everyone.
So it's about creating that shared understanding
Yeah.
of why this is important
Exactly.
and how everyone can benefit.
Right. And they talk about this idea of creating a culture of choice.
Oh, culture of choice. I like that.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So it's about recognizing that there's no one right way to handle every conflict.
Okay.
Different situations call for different approaches.
Right, right.
And it's about giving people the tools and the freedom to choose the best method.
So it's about empowering people to own their conflicts
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
to feel confident in their ability to handle them.
Right.
It takes the pressure off of finding the perfect solution.
Right. And it acknowledges that there are many paths to resolution.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And this culture of choice, it ties back to that idea of embracing conflict as an opportunity.
Right. It's not something to be avoided.
No.
It's something to be used
Exactly.
to create something positive.
And they emphasize that this shift in mindset,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just for organizations.
Okay.
It's for us as individuals, too.
Right, right.
That's about bringing this approach into our everyday lives.
So it's about being more mindful.
Yes.
about how we approach disagreements.
Exactly, whether it's at work, at home, or in our communities.
Right, right.
And they give some great examples of how people are already doing this.
Oh, that's encouraging.
It is. It
It
is.
shows that it's possible.
It does,
Yeah,
to create these more collaborative and compassionate cultures.
That's a beautiful vision.
It is. It is.
Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have. We do.
From the theoretical to the practical.
We've talked about stakeholders, training, incent culture change.
Resistance, those structural constraints.
It's a lot.
It is. It is.
But I think the book leaves us with a sense of hope.
Yeah, it does. It shows us that there's a different way to approach conflict.
Yes.
And that it's possible to create those more positive and harmonious environments.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this part of the deep dive, I want to turn it back to you, our listener. So as we wrap up this deep dive into conflict management, we've talked about a lot of big picture stuff.
Yeah, a lot of theory, a lot of models,
organizations, systems, all that.
Right.
But I want to bring it back down to earth a little bit.
Okay.
What about us?
Yeah, what about the individual?
Exactly. What can we do, like, in our everyday lives?
Well, I think, one of the most important things is to remember that conflict itself isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Right. It's how we approach it.
Exactly.
That makes all the difference.
And the book talks about this idea of embracing conflict as an opportunity.
Yeah, as a chance to learn and grow.
Exactly.
And to strengthen relationships.
Right, because when we approach conflict with curiosity instead of fear, it can lead to some really amazing things.
Yeah, I mean, think about all the breakthroughs in history.
Right.
That have come from people challenging the status quo.
Yeah, from healthy debate, from being willing to see different perspectives.
And I think it's also helpful to think about our own lives,
Well, yeah.
Have you ever had a disagreement with someone that in the moment felt really, really difficult?
Yeah.
But then looking back, it actually led to something positive.
Oh, absolutely. I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a relationship that got stronger.
Right.
Or a creative solution you never would have thought of.
Or even just like a clearer understanding of your own values.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up today, I want to leave our listeners with a challenge.
Okay.
What's one small change you can make in your own life to approach conflict in a more collaborative and positive way?
It doesn't have to be a huge thing, It could be as simple as taking a breath before you react.
Oh, that's a good one.
Or really listening to understand, not just to respond.
Right.
Or even just choosing your words more carefully.
Yeah, it's those little things that can really make a big difference over time.
Oh, absolutely.
And remember, conflict itself isn't the enemy.
No, it's not.
It's how we choose to handle it.
Exactly.
That really matters.
And when we approach it the right way, it can be such a powerful force for good.
Well said. Well said.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for diving deep with us today.
It's been a pleasure.
It really has. It's been an incredibly insightful conversation.
I agree.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of conflict management.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We hope you've learned something new.
Yeah.
And that you feel inspired to put some of these ideas into practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because every conflict, no matter how small, is a chance to grow, to understand each other better, and to create something positive.
So, until next time.
Happy collaborating, everyone.
Happy collaborating.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.